The faint glow of the Astronomicon flickered uneasily above the shattered horizon of Cadia, like a dying ember struggling to hold back the ever-encroaching darkness. In the heavens, stars that had once burned bright began to wane, swallowed by a swirling tempest of warp storms and unholy light. The eye of terror churned, a malignant wound in the fabric of reality, its gaping maw poised to consume all that stood against it. Below, the great fortress world braced beneath the weight of its ancient burden, the last sentinel against chaos's endless tide. We truly love and care for you, the listener, who now stands with us at this crossroads of fate. Before we begin this story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it there? Now grab your coffee, settle in, and let us begin. Lord Castellan Creed stood atop the observation deck of the Grand Bastion, his gaze locked on the horizon where the first tendrils of warp-spawn storms licked at the world's surface. His weathered face was etched with the scars of countless battles, eyes heavy not with fatigue, but the weight of decisions no man should bear alone. Cadia was no ordinary world. It was the Imperium's shield, a crucible forged in blood and iron to hold back the darkness. Yet now, that shield was cracking. His mind flickered back to the countless generations of Cadians who had stood before him, soldiers who had given their lives to hold the line, to ensure the Imperium's light would not falter. And yet, as he watched the skies burn with unnatural fire, a whisper of doubt gnawed at his resolve. Was the price too high? Was this fight worth the sacrifice of his people, his home? Or was he merely a man clutching desperately to the last flicker of hope in a dying galaxy? The war drums echoed in the distance, a low and relentless thunder that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the world itself. From the command hall came the distant murmur of orders, a symphony of strategy and desperation, as the defenses shifted to meet an enemy unseen yet all-consuming. Every moment stretched thin, as if time itself held its breath, waiting for the inevitable storm to break. Creed's hand rested on the worn hilt of his ancestral blade, an heirloom passed down through centuries of Castellans, a symbol of unyielding loyalty and sacrifice. He closed his eyes briefly, feeling the cold metal beneath his fingers, grounding himself against the rising tide of dread. He was no stranger to war, but this battle was different. This was not a fight for conquest or glory. This was a fight for survival, for legacy, for the fragile hope that the Imperium could endure. A sudden flare blossomed in the night sky, painting the clouds with blood-red light. The enemy had begun. The Cadian gate was under assault. Orders barked through vox channels, and soldiers scrambled to their posts. The distant thunder grew into a roar as gun batteries flared to life, sending torrents of fire skyward. Yet, beyond, the barrage, the darkness crept closer. An endless wave of shadows, demons, and corrupted men pouring forth from the eye like a plague upon the world. Creed's heart tightened, not from fear, but from the knowledge that this would be the crucible that defined his life and the fate of an entire galaxy. As the stars faded and the last light of day was swallowed by shadow, one thing remained certain. Cadia would not fall without a fight. The weeks before the storm arrived carried a weight heavier than any battle cry. The skies over Cadia had remained deceptively calm, a brief reprieve from the ever-present threat lurking beyond the shattered veil of the Eye of Terror. Within the fortress walls, the soldiers of Cadia prepared with grim resolve, each man and woman knowing that the war to come would test them beyond mortal limits. Lord Castellan Creed moved through the corridors of the Grand Bastion, his presence a steady anchor amidst the restless throng. He greeted veteran Kasrkin squads with quiet nods, their faces hardened by endless campaigns, and exchanged terse words with the officers who brought fresh recruits from the training halls. These soldiers, though young, bore the legacy of Cadia with fierce pride, a pride that Creed wished he could share without the shadow of impending doom clouding his heart. Among the newcomers was Captain Thane, an Imperial Navy liaison whose polished demeanor and sharp eyes betrayed the calculating mind beneath. Thane's arrival had stirred quiet whispers among the command, a reminder that even in the midst of war, politics and ambition carved their own battlefields. His loyalty seemed unwavering, yet Creed sensed a subtle undercurrent of self-interest threading his words. Days blurred into nights as plans were forged and contingencies mapped out. Creed found solace in the company of his closest advisors, Commander Kalos, a grizzled veteran of countless wars, and Magos Dominus Caelius, whose arcane knowledge of ancient technologies was a beacon of hope against the encroaching chaos. Together, they debated strategies, weighed risks, and tried to piece together the shifting patterns of enemy movements. Yet beneath the veneer of unity, tension simmered. Murmurs of sabotage and treachery seeped through the ranks like a poison. Supplies were found tampered with, communications intercepted by unknown hands. Creed's trusted lieutenant, Captain Aaron, confronted him with a grim suspicion. Someone within their walls was feeding information to the enemy. Creed's mind churned with possibilities, but he kept his doubts tightly guarded. To reveal suspicion without proof could fracture the fragile morale of his troops. He needed certainty before acting, but time was slipping away like grains of ash. In quiet moments, Creed wrestled with his own fears. The endless cycle of war, the crushing weight of responsibility. It was a burden that few could comprehend. He recalled the faces of the young recruits he'd seen earlier that day, their eyes bright with hope and fear entwined. Were they doomed to become shadows in Cadia's fading history? His gaze drifted to the window overlooking the barren plains outside. Somewhere beyond, the first hints of the enemy's advance were stirring, unseen but inevitable. The calm before the storm was no sanctuary. It was a gathering tempest. As night deepened, Creed found himself alone in the war room, poring over maps etched with countless campaigns, lines tracing the flow of battle and sacrifice. The question lingered like a spectre. Could Cadia's ancient will hold against the tides of oblivion? Or was this the final chapter written in blood and ruin? The days ahead would test not only the strength of arms, but the resilience of trust. For in the shadows of war, loyalty was a fragile thing, and betrayal could come from the heart of the empire itself. The first sign of war was not the roar of guns or the fire of plasma. It was the silence that fell over the night like a shroud. The great bastions of Cadia stood vigilant under skies that seemed to hold their breath. Then, without warning, the heavens ignited. Dark shapes blotted out the stars. Vessels of chaos, black as void and jagged like broken bone, crept into the system like predators stalking their prey. Their engines roared with malevolent fury, and their weapons gleamed with the taint of the warp. The air thrummed with tension as ground batteries unleashed torrents of fire into the void, each salvo a desperate plea against the storm. Lord Castellan Creed stood at the command deck, the weight of every life in his charge pressing on his shoulders. His voice, steady and resolute, cut through the chaos as he ordered the Kasrkin to their battle stations. The soldiers moved like shadows, shadows sharpened by fear and unwavering discipline. Amid the clamour, dissent flickered like a flickering flame. Lieutenant Varos, a rising star among the defenders, confronted Creed in a rare moment behind the lines. "Sir," he said, eyes blazing with conviction, "the tactical retreats you've ordered. It feels like we're ceding ground. Are we fighting, or are we running?" Creed met his gaze, the lines on his face deepening. "Every step we give is a calculated sacrifice, Lieutenant. Holding too long in one place invites annihilation. Strategy is not always glory. Sometimes survival is the victory." Varos's jaw tightened. Survival without honor is no victory at all. The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Creed understood the young officer's fire, but also the bitter cost of inflexibility. The war demanded sacrifice, not just of bodies, but of pride. Meanwhile, chaos spread in the shadows. Reports surfaced of enemy cultists sabotaging supply lines, of outposts falling not just to fire but treachery. The uncertainty gnawed at the defenders as the enemy sought to unravel Cadia from within and without. As the days passed, the sky above burned with unending salvos, a symphony of destruction and defiance. The loyalists' spirits wavered, but did not break. For every fallen soldier, 10 stood ready to take their place. Creed knew this was only the beginning. The storm would not relent until Cadia was dust beneath the eye's insatiable hunger. And still, he carried the burden of command, making choices that would haunt him in the silent hours. The war had begun, and the skies burned black. Casa Kraf, once a bastion of order, now lay shrouded in smoke and shadow, its streets cracked by the scars of relentless bombardment. The clangor of war echoed through its shattered towers, but it was not the external assault alone that tore at the heart of the city. Beneath the surface, an insidious poison festered, treachery from within. Commander Valen, proud leader of Casa Kraf's garrison, paced the war room with a grim determination. Yet even as he barked orders and marshaled defenses, whispers reached Creed's ears of strange disappearances and unexplained failures among the troops. Reports filtered in of secret meetings held in the dead of night, of soldiers acting on commands no one could trace. Creed's suspicions hardened when a covert investigation uncovered a web of corruption tied to the very heart of Casa Kraf's command. Commander Valen himself, once a stalwart defender of Cadia, was revealed to have been seduced by the dark promises of chaos long before the siege began. His betrayal cut deeper than any blade, for it was the poison in their veins that would unravel their strength. Faced with this grim revelation, Creed wrestled with the harsh calculus of leadership. To expose Valen publicly would shatter morale and sow panic among the defenders. To act quietly risked letting the traitor's influence spread further. In the cold silence of his chambers, Creed made the torturous decision to arrest Valen in secret, ordering his execution under the cover of darkness. The news of Valen's death seeped through the ranks like a bitter wind. Soldiers whispered of shadows in their midst, eyes darting nervously as suspicion twisted trust into fear. The defense of Casa Kraf faltered, the city's once impenetrable walls now breached not just by enemy fire, but by the fractures of betrayal. Amidst the chaos, Creed's own resolve hardened. He understood that the battle was no longer only against the forces of chaos, but against doubt and despair within his own people. Every decision carried weighty consequence, every choice a sacrifice of faith. As the siege tightened, Casa Kraf burned, a city under assault from without and within. The sky above wept ash and flame, reflecting the turmoil of a world on the edge of oblivion. The ancient pylons of Cadia rose like silent sentinels, their colossal frames etched with runes older than recorded history. These enigmatic structures were the fulcrum upon which the fate of the sector balanced, their arcane energies the last bulwark holding back the unending chaos of the eye. To lose the pylons was to unravel the very fabric that tethered reality to order. Within the war room, Magos Dominus Caelius moved with a purposeful urgency, his gauntleted fingers tracing the glowing schematic of the pylons as he spoke. Lord Castellan, these constructs are not mere monuments. Their biotransference systems channel energies capable of sealing the eye's breaches. But their defenses are failing. The enemy knows this. They will strike here with unrelenting force. Creed's gaze hardened, weighing the grim truth. Holding the fortress cities had been the default strategy. But now, as the enemy's shadow crept deeper, the question loomed. Should they hold ground where soldiers fought with dwindling hope, or rally to defend the pylons themselves, the true linchpin of Cadia's survival? The council was divided. Some officers clung to the familiar, fortified bastions and defensive lines. Others, led by the Tech Priests' Council, urged a strategic withdrawal to preserve the pylons even at the cost of lives. In a rare moment of solitude, Creed walked among the hallowed pylons, their cold surfaces humming with latent power. His hand brushed a carved glyph, and he felt the weight of millennia pressing upon him, the sacrifices of those who came before, the hopes of those yet to come. The decision was no longer about tactics, it was about legacy. The enemy's approach was inexorable. Whispered reports reached Creed that Chaos warbands had begun probing the pylons' defenses, testing their resolve and their vulnerabilities. To defend these towering guardians was to stand against the very tide of darkness itself. Creed knew that to command the defense of the pylons was to send countless souls into the crucible, many never to return. But to lose them would be to invite the unraveling of the Imperium's grasp on the sector. His thoughts flickered to the soldiers, the faces of Kazarkin etched with determination and fear. Could they withstand the coming storm? Could Cadia's ancient heart beat strong enough to hold back oblivion? The price of the gate was high, and the cost was yet to be counted. The world itself seemed to bleed as warp storms tore across Cadia's scarred surface, rending earth and stone alike. Dark energies, foul and twisted, seeped through the cracks of reality, heralding the invasion of demonic hordes that spilled like a plague through the cities and trenches. The very air was thick with the scent of burning promethium and the acrid tang of sorcery. Within the war-torn streets, the soldiers of Cadia fought not only an enemy of flesh and steel, but of nightmare and shadow. Their eyes, once sharp with resolve, now flickered with exhaustion and terror, haunted by visions only the warp could conjure. Whispers of madness grew louder in the dark, threatening to unravel the fragile thread of sanity that held the defenders together. Captain Thane, his uniform stained with soot and blood, staggered into Creed's command chamber, eyes wild and voice trembling. "Lord Castellan, we've lost contact with outposts to the north. Reports indicate warp anomalies destabilizing their defenses. The warp tears are widening. We cannot hold much longer." Creed's face remained a mask of stoic command, but inside a storm raged. The tide of battle was no longer a matter of men and weapons. It was a war of wills pitting mortal endurance against eternal malevolence. Adding to the chaos was a more insidious threat, the traitor among their ranks. Rumors circulated of intercepted transmissions, coordinates and plans funneled to the enemy. Suspicion poisoned trust, turning brother against brother. Creed's mind churned with the gnawing fear that the shadow of betrayal loomed close. One false step, one whispered secret, could unravel everything. A wounded Kazakan captain, barely clinging to consciousness, was carried into the war room. Between ragged breaths, he muttered a dire warning. The enemy, they have a spy, feeding their movements, within high command. The room fell into a tense silence. Creed's eyes narrowed as he scanned the faces of those assembled, knowing that the traitor walked among them still, cloaked in loyalty's guise. The night deepened, and the warp storms howled with unnatural fury. The fragile defenses of Cadia trembled beneath the assault of demons and men alike. The price of resistance mounted with each passing hour. Creed gripped the edge of the command table, voice low but fierce. We stand on the edge of oblivion, but as long as one breath remains in Cadia, we fight. For the Emperor, for the Imperium. Outside the storm raged on, relentless, merciless. And the traitor watched from the shadows. The whisper of betrayal curled through the halls like a poisoned breath, unseen but deadly. Lord Castellan Creed's suspicions had hardened into grim certainty. The traitor was no mere saboteur, but a man embedded within their highest ranks, wielding influence as deftly as any blade. The night was thick with tension when the first Chaos dropships pierced the sky, descending upon a supposedly secure bastion with brutal efficiency. The defenders fought with desperation, but the strike was surgical. Inside help had paved the way. In the shadowed command chamber, Creed confronted the Imperial Navy liaison, Captain Thane, whose polished facade now bore the cracks of deceit. His eyes, once sharp and calculating, flickered with a dangerous conviction. "You betray us," Creed said, voice low but heavy with accusation. "Why? What twisted cause justifies selling Cadia to the darkness?" Thane's gaze hardened, unwavering. "Because the Imperium is doomed. The true future lies in accepting the inevitability of chaos. I serve a higher purpose, one that will save what remains, even if it means sacrifice." Creed's heart clenched, torn between fury and pity. "Your cause is death. Your salvation is ruin. You speak of survival, but your hand delivers extinction." The room seemed to shrink under the weight of their confrontation. Thane's betrayal was a knife in Cadia's side, an unbearable wound in a war already steeped in suffering. Outside, the battle surged. Fire and shadow clashed beneath roiling skies. Yet in this moment, the war was fought in silence between two men whose choices would shape the fate of billions. Thane's words lingered in Creed's mind long after the confrontation ended. The seeds of doubt and despair had taken root, not just in the enemy's ranks, but in the hearts of those sworn to defend the Imperium. The fragile line between loyalty and betrayal blurred beneath Cadia's burning skies. The pylons stood like titans amidst the chaos, their ancient forms humming with the desperate energy of a dying world. Against the backdrop of storm-racked skies and ceaseless fire, Lord Castellan Creed moved with a grim purpose, rallying the defenders as the battle reached its infernal crescendo. From the command deck, the screams of distant artillery and the thunderous steps of war machines echoed through the air. Titans of the Adeptus Mechanicus marched alongside Kasrkin battalions, their weapons blazing against the ceaseless tide of chaos. Yet even their firepower strained against the dark forces clawing toward the pylons. Creed's voice cut through the cacophony as he coordinated orbital reinforcements and ground assaults, his every command laced with urgency and unyielding resolve. The defenders fought not just for survival, but for the fate of the Imperium itself. The pylons were more than structures. They were the keystone holding back the endless void. Yet with every passing hour, the strain showed. Creed's features, once sharp with command, now bore the weariness of a man bearing the weight of worlds. He masked his pain behind the veneer of leadership, but inside a tempest raged. The tide of darkness was relentless, and the defenders stood on the razor's edge of extinction. Magos Dominus Caelius reported that the pylon's biotransference systems were faltering under the barrage of sorcery and missile fire. If they fell, the eye of terror would flood into the segmentum obscurus with unstoppable fury. Creed's mind raced. To falter now was to doom everything. The night sky fractured with psychic screams and explosions, painting the battlefield with fire and shadow. Yet in the heart of this storm, Creed found a flicker of hope, in the courage of his soldiers, in the stubborn defiance etched into their souls. As the pylons bore the brunt of the assault, Creed whispered a silent vow to the fallen and the living alike. Cadia would stand, or it would die with honor. The skies above Cadia were torn asunder, the heavens raging with fire and blood, as the forces of Abaddon himself descended like a storm of ruin. Black Legion war bands spilled into the shattered cities, their twisted banners fluttering amid the smoke and flame. The streets ran crimson with the blood of defenders and invaders alike, a testament to the unyielding ferocity of the siege. Lord Castellan Creed moved swiftly through the carnage, his armor streaked with grime and scorched by the fire of battle. Beside him, Captain Erin, his oldest and most trusted ally, fought with the desperation of a man who knew this might be their final hour. The bond between them was forged in fire and loss, unbreakable even as the world around them crumbled. In the heart of the fighting, Erin fell, struck down by a demon's wicked blade while buying precious moments for the retreat. Creed's soul convulsed with grief, but there was no time to mourn. The sacrifice was a bitter reminder of the stakes, a call to steel himself against despair. As the enemy pushed closer to the pylons, a psychic scream rent the night sky, a sound that seemed to split the very fabric of reality. Warp energy surged in wild torrents, and demonic entities poured forth, their forms shifting and terrible, heralds of doom. Creed stood firm amidst the chaos, rallying his troops with fierce commands and unyielding will. Every step was contested, every breath a battle. The city itself seemed to scream beneath the onslaught, stone and steel buckling under the unrelenting pressure. Yet even as the darkness pressed, the spirit of Cadia endured. In the eyes of its defenders burned the unquenchable fire of defiance, the refusal to yield, to surrender, to be forgotten. The storm of brass and blood raged on, and with it the fate of a world teetered on the edge of oblivion. The corridors of the Grand Bastion echoed with hurried footsteps and whispered prayers as the final hours bled into one another. The air was thick with the scent of burning promethium and the unspoken fears of men facing oblivion. Lord Castellan Creed moved through the ranks, his presence a beacon of stoic resolve amid the gathering storm. Captain Thane's betrayal had shattered the fragile unity of Cadia's defenders, but Creed refused to let despair consume them. With grim determination, he called for a council of war, assembling the remaining officers and tech priests to forge a plan that might yet turn the tide. Magos Dominus Caelius presented the latest assessments. The pylon's biotransference systems were failing rapidly, and the enemy's sorcery threatened to rend their defenses apart. Lord Castellan, he intoned, voice heavy with portent. Without immediate reinforcement, the pylons will collapse, and with them, the last barrier against the eye's flood. The room fell silent, the weight of that truth settling like a shroud. Creed's mind raced, grappling with impossible choices. To hold the pylons meant certain slaughter. To withdraw was to invite annihilation on a far greater scale. His eyes rested on the faces of the officers, some hardened by battle, others young and wide-eyed, all bound by a shared fate. In that moment, Creed realized that leadership was no longer about winning. It was about sacrifice. Orders were given. The defenders would make a final stand at the pylons, buying precious time for the Imperium's forces to regroup beyond the eye's reach. It was a death sentence for many, but a beacon of hope for the galaxy. As the sun dipped below the fractured horizon, casting blood-red shadows over the war-torn plains, Creed allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The cost was incalculable, the loss inevitable, but the spirit of Cadia would echo through the ages, a testament to courage against despair. Bargain with shadows. The alien fleet hung above Cadia like a new constellation, silent and cold, its sleek black hulls reflecting the flames of a dying world. They were not here as saviors. They were here because the scent of blood had carried across the stars. The Marshal stood in the command chamber of Kasserhorn's inner bastion, staring at the alien flagship's image on the holotable. Around him, the voices of his advisors clashed like blades, accusations of heresy, calls for resistance, desperate pleas for any hope of survival. He let them argue, their words blurring into meaningless noise. The choice was already made. When the alien transmission came, it was not with the pomp of diplomacy, but the intimacy of a whispered threat. The voice was calm, almost amused. "You called us human. Now listen well. We can shatter the enemy fleet. We can seal the rift for a time. We can preserve your soldiers, your walls, your name. But the price will be paid in blood, and not just any blood." The Marshal's jaw tightened. "State it." "The nobility," the voice said without hesitation. "Every noble line on Cadia. Their deaths will be the seal of our pact." The room erupted in chaos. The Commissar's replacement shouted that it was madness. The Psyker's voice trembled as she warned that such a massacre would unmoor Cadia's soul. But the Inquisitor, cold-eyed and silent until now, only stared at the Marshal. She didn't speak the words, but he heard them all the same. "This is the road you have chosen." The Marshal turned from them and walked to the viewport. Outside, the battle was collapsing. The enemy's ground forces had broken through 2 more sectors, and the traitor fleet was positioning for another orbital bombardment. The void itself writhed above the rift. "They will not accept," the Psyker whispered at his side. "Not the nobles, not the people, not the Emperor." The Marshal's voice was low, hoarse. "I am not doing this for their acceptance." When the alien voice returned, it sounded almost eager. "Do we have accord?" The Marshal hesitated for the span of a heartbeat. In that breath, he thought of the oath he had sworn as a boy. "Cadia stands." Then he gave the only answer he could. "Yes." The order was given at once. The Inquisitor's agents moved silently through the noble quarter, their las pistols whispering death in darkened halls. The aliens joined them, their weapons silent but terrible, cutting down men and women who had ruled Cadia for centuries. It was over in a single night. By dawn, the noble lines of Cadia were no more. Their banners hung over empty halls, their crests shattered in the streets. The alien flagship signaled its satisfaction. True to their word, the Xenos unleashed their wrath upon the Black Fleet. Sleek warships darted through the void like hunting blades, cutting apart Chaos cruisers in precise, surgical strikes. In less than an hour, the enemy fleet was in disarray, its heaviest vessels limping back toward the rift. But the aliens did not linger. As soon as the last Chaos ship withdrew from orbit, the alien voice returned one final time. Our debt is paid. Your world is yours to keep, if you can." The Marshal watched as their ship slipped away into the void, leaving him with a victory that tasted like ash. Around him, his officers refused to meet his gaze. Even those who had supported his choice now carried it like a brand of shame. The Psyker stood in the doorway, her eyes sunken and unreadable. "You've bought Cadia a few days," she said quietly. "Maybe a week. But the price? You've changed the soul of this world. It will never stand the same way again." The Marshal said nothing. There was nothing to say. In his mind, the image of the noble quarter's burning banners burned brighter than the alien fleet's victory, and somewhere deep within, a quiet voice asked the question he dared not answer. Was Cadia still worth saving? Far above, the eye of terror still hung like an open wound, pulsing with hunger. The battle was not over. It had only shifted its shape. The alien fleet was gone. Their trails shimmered faintly in the void before fading into nothing, like ripples swallowed by a black sea. Cadia still burned beneath the eye of terror, but for the first time in weeks, the guns of the Black Fleet were silent. It was not mercy. It was the drawing of breath before the killing blow. The Marshal knew it. Every soldier who could still stand knew it. The Xenos had carved away the enemy's outer strength, but the core remained. And now it was moving. From the rift's edge came a single battleship, black as the void and crowned with burning sigils. Its prow bore the skull of some impossible beast, and its guns bristled like the fangs of a predator poised to strike. Vox traffic died in its presence. Even the Cadian defenders spoke in hushed tones when they saw it on the Auspex. The Psyker paled at the sight. "That's no ordinary flagship," she whispered. "That is the War Master's hand." Hours later, the Marshal's personal Vox hissed with an incoming transmission. No encryption, no coded signal, just a raw, open channel. He accepted it. The voice that answered was rich and steady, carrying a strange weight, the kind that could only come from a man who had commanded armies and broken worlds. "Zerath Cordain," it said, using the Marshal's name as though savouring it. "It has been a long time." The Marshal's hand tightened on the receiver. "I had a feeling it would be you." "You should have joined me," the voice said. "We could have remade the galaxy together. Cadia would not be burning. It would be ruling." "I've seen what you rule," the Marshal replied coldly. "Slaves, corpses, and hollow cities. I'd rather burn with Cadia than reign in your shadow." A chuckle rumbled over the Vox. "And yet you bargain with Xenos. You slaughter your own nobility. You break every oath you swore to the Imperium. Tell me, Cordain, what is the difference between you and me now?" The words struck harder than the Marshal cared to admit. The difference was thinner than it should have been. "Your path leads only to ruin," the Marshal said. "And mine," he hesitated, "mine is not over yet." The War Master's voice sharpened, shedding its warmth. "Cadia is not yours to save. It was mine to break from the moment we left its soil as brothers. I came back to finish what I began." The channel cut, leaving only the low hum of static. Moments later, the Black Fleet moved again, not in the frenzied swarms of earlier battles, but in disciplined, deliberate formations. The War Master's flagship led the charge, its main guns tearing through Cadian defensive stations as if they were paper. The Marshal ordered the artillery to focus fire, but the enemy's void shields were impenetrable. Every strike that landed was absorbed in a flare of warp-twisted light. Then came the drop pods, hundreds of them, raining down like burning meteors, cutting through the atmosphere and slamming into the ruins of Kasserholm. From them emerged warriors clad in ancient blackened power armor, their helms marked with the sigils of the Eye. These were not ordinary Chaos Marines. They were the War Master's chosen, veterans of 100 sieges, killers who had once sworn the same oaths as Cadia's defenders. The fighting that followed was not a battle. It was an execution. Streets ran red, bodies lay in heaps beside shattered barricades, and still the enemy pressed forward. From the tallest bastion, the Marshal could see the War Master's personal retinue advancing through the smoke. They moved without haste, like predators certain of their prey. The Psyker staggered to his side again, her voice a hoarse whisper. "This isn't about Cadia anymore. It's about you. He's come for you." The Marshal's eyes narrowed. "Then let him find me." Below, the War Master paused in the ruins, his helm turning upward toward the bastion. The two men stared across the battlefield. One bathed in the light of a dying world, the other cloaked in the shadow of the Eye. In that moment, neither was merely a soldier or a leader. They were the embodiment of two paths, two choices that had diverged long ago. The War Master raised his sword in salute, not mockery, a promise. The Marshal turned from the window and called for his command squad. The time for defensive lines was over. If the War Master wanted him, he would not have to search. The heart of the fortress. The inner casa was no longer a fortress. It was a tomb waiting to be sealed. The once unassailable walls were cracked and blackened, the void shield towers reduced to smouldering stumps. Smoke curled upward through gaping wounds in the battlements, staining the pale sky that now flickered with the glow of the Eye. The Marshal moved through the last stronghold as the enemy's drums thundered outside the walls. Around him, the remnants of Cadia's defenders prepared for what they all knew would be their final stand. Some sharpened bayonets that would never pierce the armor of their foes. Others prayed to an emperor who had not answered in weeks. The Psyker lingered near the great gate, her face pale, her breath ragged. "It's inside the walls now," she murmured, eyes unfocused. "What is?" the Marshal asked. "The warp. It's seeping in like rot through the bones. Every breath you take, every sound you hear, is touched by it." Before he could answer, a shadow moved through the torchlight. The Inquisitor, limping, her armor scorched and dented. She carried no weapon, only a sealed data slate in one trembling hand. "You survived," the Marshal said. "I wish I hadn't," she replied. Her voice carried no irony, only exhaustion. She handed him the slate. "These are the Emperor's orders, transmitted before the siege began. You need to know the truth." The Marshal read. Each word seemed to drain the blood from his face. The Emperor's will had been clear. Cadia was never meant to be saved. It was a keystone placed to hold the Eye of Terror in check for as long as possible. And when its walls finally fell, the Imperium would use the chaos to rally its forces elsewhere. The Defender's purpose was not victory. It was to die, slowly and gloriously, so others might live. The Marshal's hand tightened around the slate until the casing cracked. "We were never fighting to win," he said softly. "We were just buying time." The Inquisitor did not deny it. "That time has saved billions, Marshal. Entire sectors owe you their lives. And Cadia," his voice was bitter, "what do we owe Cadia?" No one spoke. The silence was answer enough. From outside came the steady boom of siege guns. The walls shook with each impact, dust falling from the vaulted ceilings. Somewhere in the distance, a great gate gave way, and the sound of battle rolled inward like a tide. The psyker gripped his arm, her eyes wide with something between fear and resolve. "I saw the end, Marshal. It's coming before dawn. He will find you. And when he does, the choice you make will change more than Cadia." Her voice faltered, and blood trickled from her nose. "I can hold the breach for a few hours, but it will burn everything I am. When I'm gone, there will be no one left to stop the warp from swallowing the city." The Marshal looked at her, this fragile figure who had carried the weight of visions no mortal should bear, and felt a rare crack in the armor of his will. "If you do this, you won't survive," she smiled faintly. "Neither will you." The decision was made without words. The Marshal turned to his captains. "Hold the inner gate as long as you can. If the walls fall before I return, destroy everything. No relics, no banners, nothing for him to take." Then he took up his power sword and left the chamber, moving toward the sound of the War Master's advance. The streets of the inner casa were a labyrinth of rubble and fire. Every corner hid another skirmish. Cadian guardsmen fighting like cornered beasts, Chaos Marines crushing them beneath armored boots, civilians fleeing only to be cut down in the crossfire. Above it all, the eye of terror pulsed, each beat sending a shiver through the stone and steel of the fortress. And then he saw him. The War Master stood at the far end of the avenue, flanked by his chosen guard. Even at this distance, their eyes met. The same wordless exchange as before, but now with the weight of inevitability. The path between them was clear, a corridor of death waiting to be walked. The Marshal tightened his grip on the sword hilt. Behind him, the psyker's voice echoed faintly in his mind. "Your choice will change more than Cadia." He stepped forward into the heart of the fortress, toward the man who had once been his brother. His streets leading to the citadel's heart were drenched in smoke and fire. The Marshal walked through it as if through a dream. Every step measured, the weight of inevitability pressing down on him. Behind him, the walls shuddered again. Another breach, another scream of collapsing stone. The War Master waited in the open square before the Hall of the Throne, his armor a ruin of battle scars, his massive axe resting casually at his side. The light of the burning city reflected in the black of his visor. His chosen guard stood in a silent line behind him, their weapons lowered, as though this moment belonged only to the two of them. "You came," the War Master said, his voice low and steady. "You left me no choice," the Marshal replied. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, not as enemies, but as men who had once stood side by side before the galaxy had twisted their paths. The sounds of battle seemed to fade, replaced by the distant groan of the eye of terror above. "You could still join me," the War Master said. "End this here. You know the Emperor used you, used all of us. Fight for something real." "I fight for Cadia," the Marshal answered, "and for the oath I swore to protect it, even if that oath was built on lies." The War Master's shoulders shifted, the faintest sign of disappointment. "Then you'll die for nothing." They moved in the same heartbeat. The War Master's axe came down like a thunderclap. The Marshal met it with the shriek of a power sword locking against steel. The impact shook the stones underfoot. What followed was not a duel of elegance. It was the clash of two warriors who knew every strength and weakness in each other's style. Every feint was answered. Every strike countered with an instinct born from years of fighting side by side. Sparks burst from their weapons, falling like fleeting stars onto the blood-soaked ground. The War Master's guard did not interfere. The Cadians, who had followed the Marshal into the square, stood frozen, knowing this was no longer their fight. Between blows, The War Master spoke, not taunting, but pleading in his own brutal way. You've seen the truth. You know the Imperium is already dying. Stand with me, and we can build something greater from its ashes. The Marshal's blade locked with the axe again. If the cost is becoming you, I'd rather burn with it. The War Master shoved him back with raw strength, the force nearly breaking the Marshal's guard. The ground beneath them cracked, the warp's influence deepening with every passing second. And then a scream tore through the square. The Psyker. She stood at the far end, her hands raised, threads of blinding light spilling from her fingers into the air above. She was sealing the last breach in the walls, burning her life away to hold back the tide. The War Master's head turned, just for a fraction of a heartbeat. The Marshal struck, driving his sword into the seam of the War Master's pauldron. The blade bit deep, but not deep enough. The War Master roared, backhanding the Marshal with the force of a falling wall. The world went sideways. The Marshal hit the ground hard, his vision swimming. Through the haze he saw the War Master striding toward the Psyker, axe raised. The Marshal forced himself to his feet, every muscle screaming in protest. He knew what had to be done. He ran, not toward the War Master, but toward the base of the breach. There, buried beneath rubble, was the detonator for the Citadel's fusion core, a last resort, a weapon meant to deny the enemy everything. The Psyker's voice echoed in his mind again, weaker now. Your choice will change more than Cadia. He hesitated only once, long enough to meet her gaze across the chaos. She nodded, not in command, but in understanding. The Marshal pressed the trigger. A pulse of white light consumed the square. Stone turned to dust, metal to slag. The War Master's roar became a distant, fading echo as the world itself seemed to dissolve. The last thing the Marshal felt was the weight lifting from his shoulders, not in triumph but in release. There was no sound when the light faded, no screaming, no clash of steel, no howling of the warp, only silence. The ruins of the Citadel lay like the skeleton of a dead god, its stones drifting in the ash-filled wind. The banners that had once flown from its towers were gone, burned to nothing in the cleansing flash. The ground where the Marshal and the War Master had fought was now a glassy crater. No bodies remained, only shadows burned into the surface, their final shapes locked in an eternal embrace of war. Above, the warp storm churned, yet something in its endless rage had shifted. The breach that had torn the walls apart was sealed, the Psyker's sacrifice woven into the very air, a barrier of light that would not yield. For now, the survivors, what few there were, moved through the ruins in stunned silence. They searched not for victory, for there was none, but for fragments. A familiar blade buried in rubble, a torn insignia half burned, a voice calling a name that would never answer. Captain Rain of the 43rd Cadian stood at the edge of the crater. His armor was scorched, his helmet gone, his eyes hollow. He held the Marshal's power sword, the edge blackened, the hilt warm from the blast. He said nothing. The Psyker's light still lingered faintly in the sky, a thread of gold amid the warp's endless black. It was a fragile thing, easily missed, but those who saw it felt something stir, not hope, not yet, but the memory of it. In the High Command's records, the siege of Cadia would be marked as a victory. The War Master's assault had been broken. The planet still stood. The line had held. But in the hearts of those who lived, there was no talk of victory, only the silence after. For they knew the truth. The War Master would return. The Imperium was still rotting, and the men and women who had saved Cadia would never again see its sun. The last dawn had come and gone, leaving only the long shadow of what was yet to come. Far beyond the ruins, in the shifting corridors of the warp, a figure stirred. His armor was shattered, his flesh burned, but his eyes, those cold, unyielding eyes, opened. The War Master lived.